It was supposed to be a simple Saturday afternoon. Food on the grill, kids running through sprinklers, laughter echoing across a quiet street. But one neighbor didn't see joy, didn't hear family. She saw a problem. She saw me. Before I even took the ribs off the smoker, flashing red and blue lights pulled into my driveway. What began as a backyard celebration turned into a scene straight out of a nightmare. But what she didn't know, what none of us knew, was that the officer stepping out of that car would change everything. And what happened next left her frozen in disbelief. The smell of charcoal had always reminded me of summer. It was my thing. Hosting cookouts, family, neighbors, friends from work. Everyone came together for a day where stress didn't exist. The grill smoked, music played, kids chased bubbles, and the sound of laughter carried down the street. For me, the backyard wasn't just grass and a fence. It was the one place where I felt I could breathe. After long weeks at work, balancing bills, and living in a world that never stopped demanding more, the cookouts were my reset button. I was the guy with too much barbecue sauce on his apron, the guy who handed out extra plates, even when no one asked. But in every story, there's someone who can't stand the sight of joy. For us, that was my neighbor. A woman who never smiled, never waved back, never spoke except to complain. If a ball landed near her yard, it was a crisis. If music drifted too far, it was a violation. And if you asked me why, the answer was written all over her face. She saw color before she saw character. She saw difference before she saw neighbor. She saw us, not as families, not as people, but as intruders in a space she thought belonged only to her. That day, I noticed her blinds shift every few minutes, her silhouette pacing, her eyes darting. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on flipping burgers and handing out drinks. But deep down, I knew what was coming. The music wasn't blasting, just a little R&B playing on a speaker. The kids weren't wild, just laughing the way kids do. But to her, it didn't matter. The problem wasn't the sound. The problem was us. What I didn't know at the time was that she had already picked up the phone, already dialed those 3 numbers, already decided that our happiness was suspicious, already rewritten the scene in her mind to sound like a threat instead of a celebration. So while my daughter licked barbecue sauce off her fingers and my cousin cracked open a soda, she was telling a stranger on the other end of the line that something was wrong, that we didn't belong, that we were dangerous. Minutes later, as the sun dipped lower and the grill hissed with smoke, I heard it. The sharp, low rumble of tires against pavement. The kind of sound that makes your chest tighten before you even turn your head. And then I saw it. Red and blue lights bouncing across the houses, creeping closer until they washed over my fence. The laughter quieted. The kids froze. My stomach dropped. The party didn't stop because of the music. It stopped because of the fear. The squad car pulled in slow, deliberate, like it was hunting something. My hands instantly felt heavier, my heartbeat louder. Every story I'd ever read, every video I'd ever watched of barbecues gone wrong, played in my head. I knew how quickly this could go from noise complaint to tragedy. I told everyone to stay calm, to stay where they were. The younger kids clung to their parents, confused, while the older ones whispered, their eyes wide. My mother sat still, her hand clutching her necklace, silent but trembling. The officer stepped out, tall, expression unreadable. He scanned the scene. A grill smoking, families eating, music soft in the background. Normal, ordinary, joyful. And then I saw her, standing at the edge of her driveway, arms crossed, lips twisted into that smug little grin. Karen, watching, waiting, relishing in the chaos she had caused. In her mind, she had already won. She had called an authority to shut us down, to strip us of our peace. To her, the lights flashing across our lawn were a victory parade. The officer walked forward slowly, his boots crunching against the gravel. Every step he took tightened the knot in my chest. I thought of the headlines I'd seen, the ones that didn't end with laughter, the ones that ended in grief. The kids were silent now. The music had stopped. Even the grill seemed quieter, smoke rising into the still air as if afraid to move. And then, in the quiet, I felt it, the sting of injustice. Why was it that joy, when carried in brown skin, was so often mistaken for danger? Why was our laughter always a little too loud, our presence always a little too much? The officer finally reached the fence. His eyes swept over the crowd, resting on me, then back at her, the woman who had dragged him here with lies and exaggeration. I braced myself, ready to explain, ready to prove that we weren't criminals, that we were just families celebrating. My mouth opened, but before I could speak, something unexpected happened. The officer's face shifted. Recognition. A flicker of memory. His posture changed, and for a moment, the tension in the air bent in a direction no one predicted. Because he knew me. Not as a stranger, not as a suspect, but as someone from his past. Years ago, before the badge, before the uniform, before this very moment, I had stood in front of a classroom as his teacher. He looked at me, and the words came out steady, firm, but with a weight that silenced the air. He told everyone there was no problem, no violation, no reason for concern. The crowd exhaled. My family, frozen for so long, finally breathed. The kids whispered. My mother's shoulders dropped, and across the street, Karen's grin cracked. Because what she wanted, humiliation, intimidation, control, crumbled in her hands. The officer didn't scold us. He didn't order us inside. He didn't treat us as criminals. Instead, he treated us like what we always were. Neighbors, families, human beings. And Karen? She was left standing in the open, her smug certainty shattered by a simple truth. Her lies had no power here. The squad car pulled away without incident. The grill hissed again, music slowly returned, and the kids began to laugh once more. But the air was different, heavy, because we all knew what almost happened. We knew that if recognition hadn't sparked, if memory hadn't intervened, the night could have ended another way, a darker way, a way we'd read about too many times before. Karen stood in her driveway, silent now, the weight of her own failure heavy on her shoulders. She had tried to weaponize her assumptions, tried to erase our joy with a phone call, and she had failed. But the truth is, it shouldn't take recognition to be treated with dignity. It shouldn't take knowing someone's history, their title, or their past to see them as human. That night, we finished our meal. We laughed, but it was a quieter laughter. We danced, but it was a slower dance. And as I looked around at my family, at my neighbors, I thought about all the times others hadn't been as lucky. Because for every story like mine, there are too many that don't end with recognition, too many that don't end with relief, too many that end with tragedy. So I'll leave you with this. How many more barbecues? How many more calls? How many more lives will it take before simple joy is no longer mistaken for a crime? If this story opened your eyes, like the video and subscribe. Share it, because the more we tell these stories, the harder they are to ignore.